Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Marc Golub.
I'm Marc Golub. Welcome to part 2 of my meeting with one of American Jewry's most creative, most activist rabbis on the world Jewish scene today. Rabbi Avi Weiss, founding rabbi of the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale and founder of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, a rabbinical school for men, and Yeshivat Maharat, a rabbinical school for women, both of which reflect Avi Weiss's approach to Jewish life, which he calls open orthodoxy. And Avi Weiss also wrote a book, a terrific book that describes in most personal and intimate terms the successful fight to free Soviet Jewry. It's called Open Up the Iron Door, Memoirs of a Soviet Jewry Activist. And if you're with us for part 1 of my meeting with Avi, you also heard me describe him as the Nachshon of our time, as one who has split Red Seas for us, the Jewish people, and for the world, that we might all walk on dry shod. And Avi, it is so wonderful to have you back at this table. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I love having you. Okay, so you were kind enough to talk to me in great detail about your book. And there's so much more I wanted to talk about in terms of who you are, how you became who you are, and the philosophy you're trying to represent. You know, you spend a moment talking about your early childhood. You write movingly about your father, and your father's going back to Poland. So begin there for our audience. Where were you born, and who were your mother and father?
I was born in Monticello, New York. My father was a rabbi in Monticello, and I was born in June of 1944. And I have on the inside of a Herz Chumash, my father, when we were born, inscribed certain words. And I wish I had it with me. It's one of my prized possessions, where my father writes so movingly in Hebrew that I was born, and he was so grateful to God. He felt with my mother blessed. And then he writes, Kva nishmedu 5 million Yehudim. This was June of 44. Already 5 million have been murdered. Yiten Hashem, may the Lord see to it victory for our armed forces, victory for Israel, and Ketz Geula La'amenu. Those were his words. Mm-hmm. And when my sister was born, my sister was born a year and a half earlier, my father wrote, Kva nishmedu. He writes, already there have been murdered 2 million Jews. So apparently people knew. Mm-hmm. People knew, and so I was born in Monticello, and
your father's name was?
Moshe.
And your mother?
Miriam.
Moshe and really? Isn't that nice?
My father died a year ago. He had a profound impact on my life.
In what way?
He was a person who was not afraid to build something from nothing, and I think that quality really was a quality that I've been carrying with me, doing it in my own way, nowhere close to what my father did. But I revere my father, and he died at the age of 96. I've just finished saying Kaddish for him, and it's for me been a tremendous loss.
And your mother, how old was she?
My mother was a very young woman when she died. She was 62 years old, and in her own way, she had this feminist quality of recognizing that women should be equal, and she was the epitome of chen and chesed, of kindness and goodness, although she had great strength as a woman. I'll never forget the first time she came to our synagogue, and she came to the Torah as part of our women's prayer groups. This goes back to the late 70s or middle 70s, and tears came down her cheek. She was just so overwhelmed by this opportunity that she had until that point been denied. Mm-hmm. Then my father moved to Brooklyn. My parents moved to Brooklyn. My sister Tovah has had a great influence on my life. She's a great author. Her name is Tovah Reich. She's considered in literary circles one of the finest writers in America. She's written very on the edge novels like My Holocaust. Her husband had been the professional head of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Dr. Walter Reich. And he was the one who, when the State Department said, take Arafat through the museum, he felt, and he's a little bit to the left of Israeli politics, but he felt that that was a politicization of the 6 million. And he said, no, I'm not going to allow politics to enter into memory of the 6 million. And he said no, and in the end it really did cost him. It cost him his job. And by the way, when it came to Arafat, to his moment of walking through the museum, he decided not to because on that very day, the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke out, so the cameras were not on Arafat. They were on Lewinsky, so much for his sincerity in wanting to learn about the 6 million. And since I mentioned Tovah, I have a brother Mordechai, who's a great Jewish educator, and another sister, Sari, who has taught me so much about spirituality. She's in the Rainbow Coalition. She has the most open heart. And a younger brother, David, who is an industrial psychologist, Smicha from YU, and now is traditional egalitarian. And when people ask me about this love I have for all of Am Yisrael, it comes from the love that I have for my siblings. We've taken different paths, and we love each other unconditionally.
That is marvelous. Your father came from Poland in the 1930s.
My father
early
was actually
30s, right?
raised in the town of Oshvenchim.
That's right.
Which became Auschwitz. He was raised there, and I remember when our eldest grandson took his shvuah at the kotel, and he received his gun. He ultimately became part of an elite unit called Egoz in the Israeli army, and he received his Tanakh. My father was crying. Marc, I've never seen my father cry. And I said to my dad that night, Abba, and he said to me, I was raised in Oshvenchim, and as a little boy they used to beat us up. And we tried to defend ourselves, but it was difficult. But now, to see my great-grandson join the Israeli army, those were tears of joy. That's, my father instilled whatever love I have of the Jewish people and of Israel. It came from my father.
One of the things that I found so interesting in the beginning of your book was that you described what it was like to be in the yeshiva world. And I'm going to read a line from your book. At school, I was being taught that to remain silent in the face of threats, to keep one's head down, was one's best means of survival. This was the model you had in your yeshiva upbringing, where the Shoah was, although all of your teachers, you say, were survivors, they never discussed the Shoah. And there was never a model or a suggestion to you growing up that activism should be part of your Jewish life. Now, at some point, activism becomes a part of it, and you described that as well. But I wish you'd speak to what you think this said about the world in which you were raised. Why was it that you feel there was no emphasis on Jews standing up, being strong, saying no, fighting for their rights, which we see post-67 war? But this is in the, 50s coming up? And this was not a world you grew up in. Reflect on that for me.
I was raised in two worlds, Marc. The schools that I went to, certainly the elementary school, Yeshivat Torah, was a Haredi school. And the philosophy of the Haredi school is the philosophy of shtadlanus, appeasement. You dialogue, you talk to governments, you don't stand up and protest on behalf of your own rights. That's the way I was raised in school. But at my home, my father and my mother, they were religious Zionists, and I was very influenced by B'nai Akiva. And I think it's there that I really imbued and took in the importance of standing up with Hadar Yisrael, with Jewish pride. I attended and was part of the B'nai Akiva in Brighton Beach, where about 8 years earlier, the head of that SNF was none other than Rabbi Meir Kahana. So we really were taught the importance of standing up for Israel and loving Israel.
Mm-hmm. You also describe in the book a personal journey you take where you become more and more aware of what you want to do. And you study in Israel.
This was post-high school. In high school, I majored in basketball. I thought I could play ball, but no. In those days, if you were 5'4", you were the center of the team. But
by the way, you know, a great basketball enthusiast in Hebrews at Riverdale, your congregation, is Jeff Gurok.
No doubt.
Did you ever play with him?
Thank God I didn't, because he would just
fabulous.
Wipe the floor with me.
Right. Yeah, fabulous in many, many, many ways. Anyway, so you were a basketball enthusiast as a kid in high school. Then what?
Then my father, his last hope was to send me to Israel. So he sent me to Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavneh. And I immersed myself in Torah study in a very serious way. And I met young people. My chavruta was Menachem Weininger. And after studying with him for a week or two, I get up one morning and he's walking across the field in his uniform. I said, Menachem, where are you going? I need your help. I need help in studying Talmud. And he said, it's my responsibility. I'm part-time in the yeshiva, and I'm in the army. And that started for me a tremendous love of Medinat Yisrael. I mean, today, America is a very important place for Jews, but I believe that the national destiny of the Jewish people is not unfolding in America. Mm-hmm. I believe it's unfolding in the state of Israel.
What is your sense now of where the American Jewish community is? And how do you react, and what concerns you about what seems to be not only a certain sense of ignorance and apathy, but in some way, especially on college campuses, among Jewish students, there's a kind of anger at the state of Israel?
I don't see it that way, Marc. I travel to campuses, and Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, our men's rabbinical school, is one of the biggest feeders of rabbis to Hillels. There are now Chovevei rabbis from Cornell to Harvard to Stanford to UCLA, all over the country. And I travel to these places and I speak to these students. And while there would be a minority of students who struggle with the state of Israel, I think the vast numbers of Jews in Israel are very supportive of the state of Israel. And contrary to the surveys and the Pew reports, I believe with all my heart and soul that Jews today are searching. They're searching for meaning. They're searching for purpose. They're searching for God. It may be beneath the surface. They're searching, but they're searching. And that is why I've dedicated myself the last 20 years of my life to training and graduating with enormous help, men and women who will serve as spiritual leaders. Yeshivat Chovevei Torah is a men's rabbinical school, and Yeshivat Maharat is a women's rabbinical school. And they fanned out all over the country. Cumulatively, there are almost 150 men and women around the country, over 100 just from Chovevei Torah.
Fabulous.
And they're teaching and they're touching souls. I find that Jews in America today, they're looking for a balance. They want a Judaism that's rooted, that's traditional, that's rooted, as long as it's not stagnant. Or the flip side of that is they want something which is fluid, but with parameters. And that's what I call open orthodoxy is all about.
Yes, talk to me about that also. Before you coined the phrase open orthodoxy, the phrase that was used is modern Orthodox. There's, mainstream Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and modern Orthodox. And then you come along and say, for some reason you don't like the phrase modern, you want it to be open Orthodox. Why?
Well, first, I think that modern Orthodox is old. It's old. It goes back to the 50s. It goes back to the 60s. And For me, the term lacks vibrancy. It lacks new life. We're in the post-modern era. But having said that, terms to me are very, very secondary. And there are those within my school who prefer using the term modern orthodoxy because it is a brand name, and I'm fine with that. For me, the term open in open orthodox is more explanatory. It's more an adjective than it is a noun. But for me, the term open of orthodoxy says that it's an orthodoxy which is open, it's inclusive, it's non-judgmental. When you say the word orthodox, the last thing you think of is open. And when you say the word open, the last thing you think of is orthodox. And I think that there is a balance. Orthodox means that Marc, I profoundly believe in heteronomous law. I believe in what is called Torah min hashamayim. I believe that God wrote the Torah. I'm also committed to the meticulous observance of halakha. I see halakha, which comes from the word halach, which means to go, as a means to take me to a life of kedusha, a life of holiness, a life of the asita hayasha v'atov b'nei Hashem, to do what is righteous and what is good in the name of the Lord. And in that sense, I am unapologetically orthodox. The Torah is from God. I submit to the halakha. But in the same breath, as I've just said, orthodoxy doesn't have to be rigid. There can be an orthodoxy which is welcoming of women in spiritual leadership, women in learning, welcoming of converts, welcoming of LGBT, welcoming of people with faith struggles, welcoming of dialogue and interaction with my colleagues in the conservative reform, reconstructionist renewal movements. And that's really the balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. On the issue of women, you're very visible. In fact, most people who understand who you are in terms of the Jewish synagogue world, they immediately associate you with being a pioneer in the Orthodox community for bringing women into the synagogue and into synagogue life and into participation, into women's minions. And then, lo and behold, you take this dramatic step of actually taking Sara Hurwitz, studying with her, and then giving her smicha. She becomes a rabbi. By the way, a big deal is made of the fact that in the end you did not call her rabbi, but you called her Rabbah. You want to speak to that for a moment? Anybody who says to you, did you, at the last moment, Avi Weiss, have to give in to pressure, and instead of calling her rabbi, called her Rabbah, not because it's a matter of masculine and feminine terminology, but because by not calling her rabbi, you did not ultimately offend those in the mainstream Orthodox world who felt that you were simply going too far.
Right. Well, first, one can talk about this literally for hours. I'm so immersed in this, and so even hours would be inadequate. And I have much to say, but I have much to learn. But it must be said right at the top that Orthodoxy is not egalitarian. It's certainly not fully egalitarian.
And explain, everybody's watching right now all over America. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
By that I mean that 90% in Orthodoxy of what a man can do, a woman can do. And 90% of what a woman can do, halachically, a man can do. But there's 10% of distinction. There's 10% of what a woman can do that a man cannot do, and what a man can do, and what a woman cannot do. For example, let's start at something very, very basic. Orthodoxy is matrilineal. Matrilineal means that if one's biological mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. If it's patrilineal alone, that's not enough. If I convert a woman could take a woman convert literally into the mikveh. Something, God forbid, that of course a man cannot do. In the same breath, there are many areas of Jewish law, for example, what is called Dvarim Shebekdusha, certain prayers that can only be led by a man and not by a woman. And I say that unapologetically. It's a different model than the American model. On some level, it interfaces with the physiology of men and women. Men and women, by and large, we have hearts, we have lungs, we have livers. There's a lot of interfacing, but in the same breath, of course, there are distinctions. And that's the step-off point. As it relates to role of women in synagogue, let me say the following. I only pray in a synagogue where there is a mechitza, where there is a partition.
Separation between men and women.
Separation between men and women. But for me, a mechitza does not mean that women hear less or see less. For me, the test of a mechitza is when you walk into the sanctuary and no one is inside. You should not be able to discern on which side the men and women sit. And I have a bit of a game that I invite people who are coming into the synagogue for the first time when no one is in the sanctuary, and I ask them on which side they think the men and women sit. 80% of them get it wrong. Apparently there's a tradition that as you walk in, men are on the right side. In our synagogue, women are on the right side. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. Our synagogue is structured in such a way that there's a men's section, there's a women's section, and there's a third neutral section. Neutral section. So when Rabba Sara Hurwitz, she can speak. We just clear that neutral bima section, and she's there alone. Men could be there alone. A woman could be there alone, and the men are not there. And that's the way we conduct our services. As it relates to studying of Torah, with all my heart and soul, men, women can learn Torah on the same quantitative.
Of course.
I mean,
halakhically, we're talking about.
I'm talking halakhically.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, Rabbi Soloveitchik introduced at Stern College, where I taught for 30 years, the Bet Midrash, where I taught. I taught women Talmud for many, many years at Stern College. And as it relates to spiritual leadership, there is no barrier that would prevent women from becoming spiritual leaders.
Okay, I want to just push you a little bit. I understand the issue of study. In terms of learning and teaching. There's nothing that would halakhically prescribe a woman from doing either of those.
Right.
And if an Orthodox man didn't want to study with a woman, he had that right, but there's nothing, he would not be in any way violating halakha if he studied with a woman. But when it comes to a rabbi being a shliach tzibur, and one of the reasons why the issue is made is very often the rabbi leads the congregation in prayer. And you and I know, according to the Jewish law, if you're not obligated to do something, you can't be a shliach tzibur, you can't be the representative of somebody helping them to fulfill that commandment.
Right.
So this sounds technical, but one of the issues that has prevented certain congregations from permitting women to be rabbis is they argue one of the things a woman does is lead prayer. One of the things a rabbi does is lead prayer. And if we have women rabbis, inevitably or perhaps it will lead to a situation where a woman would now lead prayer, and that is a violation of halakha. How do you handle that for Rabba Hurwitz? Does she ever lead the congregation in prayer? Would you want her to? Or are you saying, no, you're perfectly happy with a situation where although she may teach, she may inspire, she cannot lead the congregation in prayer?
She does lead our congregation in the prayers that she's permitted to lead. And inevitably she, and now there's Rabba Anat Sharbat, and now Rabba Amy Smith, and there are other Rabbas, or Maharat.
Okay, but there are certain prayers you would not want her to lead.
That's correct.
Okay,
correct.
and your congregation would respect that?
Look, in most congregations, the rabbi is a rabbi. The rabbi is a pastoral counselor. The rabbi is a teacher. The rabbi delivers a sermon. And all of that women can do equally as men. For those synagogues where the rabbi has to function as one who is the chazan, so that would be problematic. But there are plenty synagogues in the country where there is a division, if you will, of avodah, a division of service. And I like the title Rabbah. Actually, when one finishes Yeshivat Maharat, we grant ordination, Torah. It is the exact same smicha that a man receives. There is no difference. The curriculum of learning is the same. The degree is the same. The title that the woman accepts, that is their decision together with the institution that they're going to serve. I have learned that different communities are in different places in terms of that title. For example, in Los Angeles, at Congregation B'nai David, one of the outstanding rabbis in the country, Rabbi Yosef Kanevsky, so there is a Maharat graduate who has smicha who's serving there. Her title is Moratenu. Moratenu. It's a beautiful title. Actually, that was a title used by the great Nechama Leibovitz, my Rebbe in Chumash,
Yes.
one of the great scholars. There are other
Which
communities.
means our teacher.
Our teacher. It's not just Morah. It's
Correct.
our teacher.
Our
It's
teacher.
a play on the word yaro, which speaks to the ability of women to be decisors of Jewish law, which is what is the key to smicha. And there is
Are
no
women allowed to be decisors?
no barrier whatsoever. One has to remember that the smicha from Moses at Sinai, that broke in the 4th century in the time of Hillel II in 360 CE. And so the smicha today is not the smicha that goes all the way back. Smicha today means that one is seen to have mastered Jewish law and has the ability to be a posek
Correct.
or a poseket.
Right.
Women can do that just as well as men.
Okay.
But the title is a personal decision. In our synagogue, the women have taken the title Rabbah. There are other places where they take the title Maharat, which is an acronym of the mem of Morah, of halacha, and so on and so forth.
Would you be against a woman taking the title of rabbi?
One of our graduates has taken the title rabbi.
Does it upset you?
You know, I prefer the title Rabbah. It's the title that in Israel there's an organization which is the equivalent of JOFA here in America that they thought that the title Rabbah is a better title. And for me, in terms of my nuanced understanding of roles of men and women, it speaks to the reality that while men and women in 90% of areas, they interface, their roles interface, there is 10% of distinction. And so Rabbah is not rabbi and rabbi is not Rabbah, but as far as the larger world is concerned, they're spiritual leaders.
Okay. One more question in this area. A woman is not permitted to be a witness in Jewish law on Jewish religious issues.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you would follow?
We do follow that. So if Rabba Sara, for example, facilitates a marriage ceremony, she'll facilitate it all, but she won't sign the document.
Okay.
And 10 out of 10 times, I don't sign the document.
But
There are
for a
others.
different reason.
But there are other rabbis. All I'm trying to say is in terms of curtailing the role of a rabbi, that doesn't really cut out any role that a rabbi is playing. Generally, the signatories to these documents are signatories who, it's not the rabbi
Of course.
who's performing.
You're absolutely right.
And Sarah has Rabba Sara, and she's the hero. She's the person. And nothing that happened, you know, it's not, God forbid, that I did this to Sarah. Often people use that kind of language. Rabba Sara stands on her own. For me, she is.
Well, she's fabulous.
I
by the
call
way.
her number 42. She's my Jackie Robinson. She's absolutely
Okay.
extraordinary. And there are many other women now who have followed suit.
Absolutely. She is the dean of
She's the
Yeshivat
dean,
Maharat.
and she's going to be taking soon, God willing, even more leadership
Okay.
in the school. And the school has an extraordinary Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Jeffrey Fox, who actually has smicha from Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. Let me put something just in a certain framework, if I may, Marc. In the early 90s, I found that the modern orthodoxy that I had grown up with at Yeshiva University under the direction of my Rebbe, the Rebbe of thousands, Rabbi Soloveitchik, had moved precipitously to the right. And I became concerned about that. My son was then a student, Dove, who is now a doctor of religion teaching at the University of Illinois. We're Big Ten fans and just married. And we saw that it was moving precipitously to the right. And we stepped into that vacuum. And in these past 20 years, Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, which is a men's rabbinical school, was founded. It has 40 students now and has now graduated 108 students, serving in 35 synagogues, in 15 to 20 hillels, serving in schools where our graduates are now headmasters of modern Orthodox schools in Atlanta, of pluralistic schools, in all kinds of important positions. A rabbinical school for women was founded, Yeshivat Maharat. A new rabbinical organization was founded that Rabbi Angel and I founded, the International Rabbinic Fellowship.
Marc Angel.
It is an extraordinary man.
Mm-hmm.
There are now almost 250 members of that organization. Women can be members of the IRF. There was just a conference where Yitz Greenberg was honored. There was well over 100 people who were participating in that conference. There is, in these 20 years, JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, which Blue Greenberg founded. That came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
There is a new international, think about it, a new Betin to deal with the hara of agunot, of chained women. Marc Angel founded the Institute of Ideas and Ideals, a modern Orthodox think tank. And so we're in a different place today, and it is my strong belief that out there in the Orthodox community, I believe there are tens of thousands and many, many more who subscribe to a more inclusive, big tent, open modern Orthodoxy. I believe they may not...
But what's the big tent? I understood everything you've said so far. When you say big tent, though, you're not inviting somebody in a way that a mainstream Orthodox synagogue wouldn't do also. In other words, when you invite people into the big tent, your big tent, who's coming into your tent that wouldn't come into a traditional Orthodox synagogue?
I'm talking about a big tent in terms of welcoming women to learn on the same level as men and women some of the issues that we've already discussed. I'm talking about a big tent that promotes women in spiritual leadership. I'm talking about a big tent that wants to move away from the centralization of rabbinic authority, which has really been, it's been so unfortunate in Israel that the chief rabbinate is unfortunately held in disdain by so many. When I grew up in my father's home, there was the chief rabbinate and God in that order. But that was the chief rabbinate in the spirit of Rav Kook. It's very different today. And unfortunately, the Rabbinical Council of America, under pressure from the chief rabbinate, instead of saying, we believe in our rabbis in the field to do conversions, they have now moved to the centralization of conversion. There is an orthodoxy today that is moving towards centralization.
Yes.
Big tent in terms,
Okay.
in terms of saying that I trust the Orthodox rabbi who is in the field. I trust that they know halacha, and I trust that they know the situation and conditions in ways that no centralized rabbinic authority knows. Big tent in terms of conversion. Mark, there are 300,000 Russians who have come to Israel who are not halachic Jews. Statistics have just surfaced. In the last 20, 25 years, the statistic that I saw is of the 300,000, 7,000 have been converted. Ribono shel olam. We've got to make conversion more welcoming. And if it's centralized here, there is a very small number of converts in America who are converting Orthodox. It shouldn't be that way. The numbers should be much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
That's what big tent means. Big tent means if I struggle with faith, I want to hear your question. I allow you in and to struggle with God. Big tent means I welcome LGBT. One of my proudest moments at the synagogue, and I've stepped back, our senior rabbis, Rabbi Stephen Exler, who's just an absolute gem, one of the best rabbis in the country today. One of the best, the last, if you will, action in my rabbinate was an executive board meeting where the executive board voted unanimously that partners who are in our synagogue will be full households in our synagogue.
As opposed to, explain.
As opposed to many places where they won't be welcomed in as members. SAR Academy, Kinneret, the schools in our community, they have students who've come out already. Rabbi Tuli Hartstock, the principal of SAR, spoke to this issue. It got 30,000 hits just recently. He understands that. That's what Big Tent means.
Yes, I want you to comment, though, contrast what is done in other parts of the Orthodox world, in America.
Look, I believe what's happening today is that the modern Orthodoxy of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there is a piece of that modern Orthodoxy in Yeshiva University that has moved to the right, that is today what I would call Haredi light. In the same breath, I believe that the conservative movement is moving left. And I feel that it's inevitable that there's going to be a merger between conservative and Reform Judaism. And in between this movement to the right and the left is this Orthodoxy, the big tent, inclusive, more open modern Orthodoxy. And I believe it goes beyond Chovevei Torah, the men's rabbinical school, and Maharat, the women's rabbinical school. I believe that it takes in, I'll use the term silent majority, even though it's not a majority, but it takes in the silent majority in Teaneck, New Jersey, in Boca Raton, in LA, the more progressive voices at Yeshiva University. Yeshiva University has now developed and founded the Center for the Jewish Future. They've done big tent kind of work. There are very open voices at Yeshiva University. It's not a monolithic community. By the way, recently, commentary, I asked 100 people to write what they think the community is going to look like 100 years from now, I think, or 50 years from now. So I did a piece, and I spoke about how I feel that heretofore modern Orthodoxy, there's this split. There's a movement to the right, conservative to the left, and in between we fall. And my last line, which they cut out, read, "I'm so certain that I'm right, that if I'm wrong, anyone who wants a beer from me, I'll buy you a beer. 50 years from now, I'll buy it."
Very good. All right, two questions. Number one.
It's like the person who knows everything and knows nothing.
I understand. Number one, why has mainstream Orthodox world rejected you? Why is it that the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the umbrella organization of Orthodox rabbis, why does it not recognize the graduates of your rabbinical school? Why was it that if everything you say you believe is halakhically based, why is it so hard? It's one thing if an Orthodox Jewish congregation said, look, what he's doing is perfectly kosher, but it's just not our style. Everybody has a right to their own minhag. Fine. That's not what they say about you. What they say is, in fact, somebody writes about Avi Weiss that the Judaism you're creating is no more authentic than Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, and Constructionist Judaism. That's the kind of the slings and arrows that are being thrown and shot at you. And I want to know first, why do you think that's true? And does it hurt you? Does it matter to you when all of a sudden there was this big flap? Will we accept or not accept Avi Weiss's conversions in the state of Israel? And you had to go fight for that. By the way, they did the same thing to Riskin, Shlomo Riskin. Shlomo Riskin has been a rabbi, the chief rabbi of Efrat, and he comes up for renewal in essence, and they're questioning whether he's Orthodox enough because he has his own Torah institutions in Israel. So that there's a fight going on in the Orthodox world. I don't know the extent to which non-Orthodox Jews are even aware of it. And I'm thinking to myself, is this, inside baseball? Will our audience find this interesting or not? For me, this is fascinating. And I'm hoping there are enough in the audience who really care about the future of Jewish life in general. And you're a you're a major player in where we're going in the Jewish future. So I'm asking you to comment on the way you are being reacted. If everything you're doing is halachic, why are you so upsetting to congregations which may want to practice differently? But why do they say you're not authentic, that you're some kind of reformed, you should become a conservative rabbi and a conservative Jew? What's the real, how do you view that? And I want to know also if it hurts or not.
Well, that's a big question, Mark. That's a Marc Golub question coming from somebody who knows and has expertise. It's just amazing the way, coming from where you come from, you just have such a broad understanding of the Jewish community. There are many members of the RCA who today are members of the new modern Orthodox Rabbinical organization called the International Rabbinic Fellowship. I rest my case. My point is that there are many members of the RCA who are very, very supportive of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. On the official level, the Rabbinical Council of America has never, ever visited Yeshivat Chovevei Torah.
Because?
Don't know.
Oh, come on.
It's been more than 15 years. All I know is if I heard that there was a Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, and the most extraordinary, outstanding men, rabbis of Orthodox Union synagogues throughout the country, rabbis, JLI rabbis on campuses who are paid a salary by the Orthodox Union. If I heard that there was such a yeshiva of men who, if they wanted to, they could go into law, they could go into medicine and make 2 times and 10 times as much money, I'd be dancing in the streets and I would proactively pick up the phone and say, Avi, I want to visit your school. I want to learn more about that school. And so on an individual level, there are many RCA rabbis who are strong supporters of Chovevei. They're on the Rabbinic Advisory Committee of Chovevei. They're in the International Rabbinic Fellowship. But on the top level, for whatever political reason, the RCA has not recognized the graduates coming from RCA.
Is it politics?
It's politics.
Are you a threat to them in some way?
You know,
and I don't mean you personally, although you personally as well, but I really mean, is the institution of YCT, is it a threat to them?
You know, there's been one modern Orthodox rabbinical school in the country for years, and suddenly there's another modern Orthodox rabbinical school in Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. But Marc,
the first one is
Yeshiva University, RIVERDALE.
But it's not.
Marc, I just want to say this.
Yeshiva anymore.
Well, this is my point. My point is that if you were to look at the Bet Midrash, look, they'd have to answer for themselves, but there certainly is a pull to the right. It's not a monolithic constituency at Yeshiva University.
But it's definitely a move.
Yeah.
It's not. You are a disciple of Soloveitchik.
I just want to say this. I don't pay much attention to the RCA. It's very similar to the world of Soviet Jewry. Very similar to when we went to Auschwitz to protest against the convent and raised the voice of Jewish conscience in terms of Shoah memory. When the establishment criticized me, I didn't pay much attention. And the reason I didn't pay much attention is we all have just so much energy. If I'm going to use my energy reacting, I'll have no energy left.
I understand.
I don't pay attention. I pay minimal, if any, attention to what the RCA is doing, even though I consider them my brothers. There's only brothers there, and in the spirit of Avat Yisrael, I would embrace any one of them. My reaction is simple: change, facts on the ground. My reaction is recruit more students, train more students, place more students. This year we graduated from Yeshivat Chovevei Torah under the leadership of Rabbi Asher Lopatin, the new president, who's extraordinary, and Rabbi Dov Linzer, who's the Rosh Yeshiva, who in my opinion, Dov Linzer is the greatest Talmud Chacham I have met since Rabbi Soloveitchik.
Really?
He is absolutely extraordinary. We graduated our largest class, 13 students. 13 students, with one student going to Sacramento. He is the rabbi of the modern Orthodox synagogue in Sacramento. We have students, the rabbi of Birmingham, Alabama, the modern Orthodox rabbi is Chovevei. Nashville, Tennessee, Chovevei. New Orleans, Chovevei. All over the country, in Berkeley, Chovevei, the largest Mechitza shul in North America. 1,600 families. Shar Shamayim in Montreal is Rabbi Adam Shire, Chovevei. The list goes on. Potomac, where the previous rabbi in Potomac was a previous president of the Rabbinical Council of America. It's an OU synagogue. It's a 500 members synagogue, Beth Shalom. In Potomac is Rabbi Nissan Antin. That's my response. My response to the critics of Yeshivat Maharat is, we have almost 30 students now. That's extraordinary. We have women, 15 women have been ordained. They're serving everywhere. That's the way you respond. That's using energy proactively.
Well, good for you. That's a wonderful answer.
But I didn't answer your question. Does it hurt me? Do you want the answer?
Yes.
I guess deep down, while I don't pay attention to it, on some level it hurts. I've written about the difference between raising a voice against, let's say, the Soviet Union, or when we went to protest what happened at the Amiyah, July 18th in 1994, and we knew right away that Menem in Argentina was covering up. That was the largest attack against the Jewish community in the exile since the Shoah, the destruction, the terrorist attack against Amiyah. 86 people were murdered. And so I actually was arrested in Argentina because I raised a voice against Menem. Well, when you raise a voice, when you're running after Kurt Waldheim and you're going one-on-one, even with Valence and so on and so forth, that really was just water off whatever the expression. It didn't disturb me at all because it's an external adversary, but this is family. And in all candor, that does hurt. Within my soul, it does hurt. These are my brothers.
Absolutely.
These are my sisters. The rules are different. Although it hurts, look, the RCA tried to expel me 4 or 5 years ago. They threatened me. Not nice. They're still my brothers. They're still my sisters, as painful as it is. And my reaction is, once again, change, facts on the ground. This is what I'm dedicated to. I see Jews out there across the board. They're searching, as I said before. All they need that spiritual leader to light the fire. And over, I have seen young rabbis go to communities and turn them over. Rabbi Shmuel Herzfeld, who actually graduated Yeshiva University. There was no Chovevei when he went to rabbinical school, served in my synagogue as a rabbi, went to Washington. What a great rabbi he is. I'll give you one other story. I love to talk about these stories. Uri Topolosky tells me he's going to New Orleans. This is just a bit after Katrina. I said, Uri, you're going with Dahlia and the family to New Orleans? There's nothing there. You remember the picture of the Zaka rescuer walking out of the synagogue with water up to his throat and lifting the Torah? He says, I feel a fire in me. I've got to go and help. He takes the position. And I have the chills right now, Marc, from my head to my toes. I had the great honor to be in that synagogue the first Shabbat after it was rebuilt. And they're carrying the same Torah back to the Ark. And on top of the Ark, we've seen all kinds of verbiage on top of the Ark. On top of this Ark, it said, Mayim Rabim, Lo Yuchlu L'chabot et Ava. All the waters will not be able to extinguish the love.
Fabulous.
This is what these women, this is what these men are doing. I mean, they're separate institutions. It's
Yes,
very
of course.
clear.
Yes.
But this is what they are accomplishing. So I disagree with all of these Pew surveys. They say people are not looking. People are searching. We just have to create a new culture, the Chabad culture. That culture is the highest honor is to serve Am Yisrael. The highest honor is to be a spiritual leader, to be a rabbi, to be a teacher. I mean, doctors saved my life. Rabbi Cook used to say there's no such thing as the unholy. There's only the holy and the not yet holy. Medicine is holy. Law can be holy. Having said that, we've got enough Jewish lawyers. We need rabbis. We need them in the hundreds and in the thousands to go out there and make a difference.
Amen v'amen. Listen, We have a mutual friend, Stephen Bain. He is involved in...
I love Stephen.
I do too. And he is involved in studying Jewish life. And he has talked to me often about Pew. And he loves you very much, and he loves what you're doing. And he grew up in a more centrist Orthodox world, but he has enormous regard for what you're doing. And he was part of the PORAT program we're showing on JBS. But when Pew came out, and I know you just said you don't take Pew seriously, but I want you to hear what he's concerned about, and then you comment for me. It showed that within the Orthodox world, what seems to be happening is more and more people inside Orthodoxy are gravitating to the right. And what he said to me was, he had sort of an optimistic hope about where your form of open Orthodoxy, and it's not you alone. It is, again, the people I mentioned last time. It's the Shlomo Riskins and the Yitz Greenbergs. And it was David Hartman before he passed away. And you studied with Soloveitchik when Soloveitchik was trying to teach a whole cadre of you guys that there was a midrashic approach to Judaism that was very open and embracing while being committed to halakha. And what Bain is saying to me is, when you look at Pew, it seems as if within the Orthodox world, modern open Orthodoxy hasn't caught on. And the shift you're talking about at Yeshiva University is a shift seen throughout the Orthodox world. And maybe it's a shift that's happening in society as a whole, that people feel a pull towards a more authoritarian, fundamentalist-oriented religion. And in Judaism, that's Orthodoxy. And it's not the kind of Orthodoxy that says, let's look at this honestly and openly. There's nothing that prevents a woman from doing 90%, to use your number, of what a man can do. But there are other people who are saying within the Orthodox world, no, Avi Weiss is taking us towards non-Orthodoxy, and that if you want to be a real Jew, you can't do it within the modern open Orthodox framework. You have to do it either within what's called mainstream, the good of Israel type of Orthodoxy, or Haredi Orthodoxy. So he's saying that in essence, as wonderful as he thinks what you're doing is, he's worried what you're doing hasn't caught on within the Orthodox community the way he expected it to do. What would you say?
Well, first, I have such respect and love for Steve. And Stephen and Edith have gone through a lot. About a year ago, they lost their son who was to be married. And not only was he killed in that terrible, terrible car crash, but his future in-laws were also killed. And
the funeral service was at your synagogue.
Yes.
We were both there.
Right. I have the great honor to, I wish it were unnecessary, I've been saying Kaddish for my father, and Steve comes regularly and says Kaddish for his son. And when we were creating Porat, I reached out to Steve. I thought it would be a good idea just for him to get involved in something.
Oh wait, Porat's an acronym. It stands for?
It's an acronym. It's figured out the acronym. Only Rabbi Greenberg can do this. People for an Orthodox Renaissance and Torah. But Porat literally means Ben Porat Yosef, fruitful. It means that it's something which is alive and creative. A fruit is rooted, but it's created, reaching upward. In my now, and Steve now has become very, very much involved with Porat. I'm not sure I've heard the same observation,
Okay.
the same analysis from Steve. So I want to just say a couple of things about this. First, I do take Pew seriously. It's serious. What I'm saying is I see another side. I see another side, and I stand by that other side because I see empirically how when there's a woman from Maharat or a man from Chovevei who is ordained and goes out into the field, I see that when you have someone who can light the fire, the differences that they can make. We just have to set our sights on attracting the best men and the best women to go into spiritual leadership, whether it be in synagogue and there are many different venues. We have students now who are in what's called Beis Hillel. They've opened up non-Chabad houses. Avram Malotik, John Leaner. They've done this in Brooklyn. They've done this in Manhattan. They're enormously successful. I don't see it the way you've mapped it out. I think for some that there has been a pull to the right, but there's also been a significant dropout. There has been a significant dropout from the Haredi world, and it's probably caused a bit by the internet. It's no longer the case that you can live confined and you're in walls and you don't know what's happening outside of your community. We have no statistical study on the numbers because we're not allowed into these communities to make that study, but I have spoken to people, Rabbi Yisachar Katz, who was raised in Satmar and now is modern Orthodox. He's teaching at Chovevei Torah, an awesome Talmud Chacham and an awesome human being, just an unbelievable person. We talk about this, and the dropout rate coming from the Hasidic, coming from the Aguda world, I wish it weren't the case, but the reality is it's significant. And you're right that there are some people who move to the right because they're looking for absolutism. It's easier to be absolutist. You want to know how to tie your shoes? Ask your Rebbe, who'll tell you how to tie your shoes. Or in the face of growing into marriage, you circle the wagons. The whole world is moving to the right since the Khomeini takeover, and we're affected by that larger world, or by those who think that the only thing that's authentic is the Haredi right-wing world. But something else is happening. There are others who don't see it that way. They're much more nuanced, and they live a world of dialectic. They don't live in a world that is black and white, and that's the challenge of what I call open orthodoxy. The challenge is, how could you be Orthodox and be passionate and firmly committed to Torah, to Tefillah, to prayer, to mitzvot? The conservative and reform movement have really gleaned from this and have understood how important ritual is. And in the same breath, how could you be open to thought, open to give and take, open to religious struggle? That's the dialectic. And I think people are seeking a creativity that comes from the tension between the two. So I don't think it's as simple as people are marching right. I don't see it that way. I think that, as I said before, Porat, the goal of Porat is to demonstrate that there are tens of thousands of Orthodox Jews who support an inclusive, big tent modern Orthodoxy. Our first program was at KJ. We thought 200-300 people would come. 700 people came. 900 people listened online. People are searching.
I agree
They're
with you.
looking.
I agree with you. But for the record, I think you're 100% correct. And I think sometimes polls do not show a dynamic. They're a snapshot of a given moment. And I believe you're absolutely right. And I still am very optimistic about the movement that you are part of and to some extent leading. So,
by the way, whether it's a movement or not, I leave to historians. I do think when you have a new men's rabbinical school, women's rabbinical school, and you have JOFA, a new rabbinic organization, I do think something's happening. But permit me a quick anecdote.
Sure.
I know our time is short. My first position was in St. Louis. I was there for a year. Rabbi Soloveitchik sent me there. It was a mixed-seated shul. I was then more yeshivish. I read in the newspapers that when a man would walk into that shul and he would be sitting near a woman, he'd pick up a piece of styrofoam and he would put it in the rivets between himself and a woman sitting near him. I went to Rabbi Soloveitchik. I said, "What are you doing to me?" And he said to me, and I showed him this newspaper article. He said, "No, that shows that there's an interest." And he encouraged me. He encouraged me to go, and I went. And I learned something very big from the Rav that day. I'm there for a short while because Dr. Belkin, the immediate past president, invited me to teach at Stern College. And they have a little going away breakfast for me. A close friend, whom I thought was an old man, he was older, 42 years old, but I was then 23, 24. He gets up and he says, Rabbi, he says in his St. Louis Show Me State drawl, I've got one blessing for you. I want to bless you. You should have many enemies. After the breakfast, I walk up to him, to Saul, and I say, a blessed memory, I say, Saul, what are you doing to me? I thought you're my friend. You're blessing me, I should have enemies? I'll never forget what he told me. He said, Rabbi, if you live in this world and you have no enemies, you know what it means? It means you haven't done anything. I meant it in the most positive way. You've got a fire in you, he said to me. I bless you with enemies. What I'm really blessing you is go out there.
That's wonderful.
Go out there. By the way,
He was right.
when I was Jonathan Pollard's rabbi,
Yes.
from 1988 to 1998, Jonathan, for 5 years, was held in Marion, where he was extraordinary. He was unbelievably heroic. And I used to fly into St. Louis, which was the closest large airport to Marion. So I figured the first time I flew through St. Louis to Marion, I saw Jonathan there 30 times. I'll see my friend Saul. Now, by this time, I'm a little bit older, and Saul, who's now 60, he's much younger. I sit down in this coffee pub, and the first thing I do is I look into his eyes. I say, Saul, guess what? I have fulfilled your blessing 100%. But I hope people will recognize that even those who disagree with me, that I come from a place of pure Avat Yisrael, of loving Am Yisrael, of loving the Jewish people, not only loving Orthodox Jews, I love all of Am Yisrael.
So how do you look at Reform and Conservative Judaism?
I look at them as brothers and as sisters, and I look at my conservative and Reform colleagues.
Are they authentic Jews?
They are authentic Jews.
Is Reform and Conservative Judaism an authentic expression of Judaism?
For those Jews, it is an authentic expression of Judaism. And what I have learned in my interaction with conservative and Reform colleagues is that I have no monopoly on passionately loving the Jewish people and the Jewish state. Not only that, I have learned so much from my conservative and Reform colleagues. I believe that conservative and Reform Judaism has learned a great deal from Orthodox Judaism.
No question.
And I believe if there's a movement in Orthodox Judaism today, in this more open, big tent, modern Orthodoxy of social justice, that was not created in a vacuum, Marc. I learned that from a David Saperstein. I used to do a gig with David Saperstein after I wrote Spiritual Activism. There were 2 editions. After the first edition, he once turned to me in front of 500 people and he said, Avi, you're only writing about Jews. And that struck me. It struck me. And I wrote a 2nd edition. And so it's our imperative, it's our responsibility to be there for the larger world. When something happens in Orlando, when something happens in Charleston, as it did last year, we have to be there. The Orthodox community has to be there. We learned that. I learned that from my conservative and Reform brothers and sisters.
You know, I've learned many things from you, and I want to tell you one of the things that I try to teach as much as I possibly can. You were in a panel, and you were talking about where does Jewish responsibility begin and end, and what about responsibility to the larger world? And you were reflecting on how sometimes we get swept up in helping the larger world and we forget about the. And you said the following: your test is, you want everyone to do no less for our own people than we would do for other people.
Right.
And I get chills saying it. It's interesting it has to be said. One would have assumed that the lesson had to be, what you do for your own, be ready to do for others. But your insight was that there are many Jews who are so concerned with, and so their attention and their even emotional inside is universalistic, to the exclusion of the Jewish family. That your comment was to all these people you were addressing, what you would do for others, that's what you should do. You should never do less for your own. Just again, speak to that for me for a moment.
Right. It's something that I believe very strongly. On some level, first, if somebody comes to me and says, I love the world, on some level it makes me nervous. But how do you love your mother? How do you love your father? How do you love your spouse? How do you love your child? On some level, it is easier to love. It is easy to love everyone, because when you love everyone, you don't have to love anyone. For me, the test of the way you love everyone is the way you love someone. That's why Hillel says, "Im ein ani li mili," if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? But he puts first, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? On some level, Mark, it is easier for a Jew to be involved in social justice for the world, because you receive all kinds of accolades, all kinds of honors. But when you do something for yourself, I think it opens one's up to criticism and vulnerabilities and all kinds of attacks. Oh, he's more Jewish than American, that we have been experiencing over the years, and I stand by that. I think one of the tests of activism is that I will do no less for my people than I would do for the larger world, and I'm constantly seeing people doing for the larger world what they're unprepared to do, even for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who is so embracing, what's your feeling for the Palestinian people, and how do you view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the notion that the only way to make peace is through a two-state solution?
Well, I was a one-state person. I wrote an article for Reform Judaism, and the article was called Israel's Right to, I wrote Yudan Shomron. The editors changed it to the West Bank. And I sometimes look at that piece. I stand by that piece. But what was most interesting were the responses from 3 Reform rabbis who, frankly, let me have it. They really let me have it. Today, if there were a partner for peace, then I think there should be there could be a Palestinian state. I just don't see it, Mark. I don't see it. I don't see it, and frankly, if the Palestinians had a Gandhi or had a king, they would have had a state a long time ago. I don't see it.
It's tragic, isn't it?
It's
a human tragedy.
It's the tragedy of the tragedy. The Palestinians can only speak for themselves, but I think history will record that the tragedy for the Palestinians was their own leadership. It's so terribly unfortunate. But I do want to say a word just about this issue. We have 3 children. Dov, I mentioned, is a professor just married. His new book, by the way, is called Pious Irreverence. He's a brilliant scholar. The piety is how we are forbidden from challenging God. The irreverence is the right, the responsibility, the obligation. All is found in Midrashic literature. I have a daughter, Dina. Dov was married to Shandy, who writes for the Wall Street Journal. Most beautiful wedding a couple of weeks ago. And Dina, who's a paper cut artist and does beautiful, beautiful work in her own community, married to Marc, who's an OBGYN. And then Marc and Ilana live in Israel, in Efrat. They have 9 children, 7 boys. And I'll never forget, Gilad has finished his service, although he's in Miluim now. I asked him if he can still handle it. The second one, Eitan, is in Sde Dov, and the third one wants to go into Shayet at the SEALs, and the fourth one is a girl. I thought we'd get a respite. And she gets a letter after her Tzav Rishon, Tzav Shmona, that says, "Oh, you've got the personality, maybe you can become a pilot," But when Gilad took his shvuah, Ilana fell on my shoulders, my daughter, my lovely daughter, and she said, she's got 9 kids. She said, "Abba, I'm going to be the mother of a soldier for the next 22 years. And I just said a prayer. I hope it'll be unnecessary. So when I hear people say all kinds of damning things about the Israeli army, I take it very personally. When my grandson, Gilad, who was in Gaza, tells me, and was in advanced EGOS unit, it's a camouflage unit, When he says to me that he went into an Arab house in Gaza and he sees a 3-year-old little girl strapped in explosives, I never asked him what happened. I think Israel has done everything it can for peace. I know there is no state that is without flaws. We all have flaws. But I say, Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo medina k'medinat Yisrael. Blessed be the people of Israel that has a state like the state of Israel. And Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo tzava, v'tzava musari k'tzva haganah Yisrael. God bless the Israeli army and the soldiers of Israel. For me, the holiest Jew is one who serves in the army of Israel. And to those high school students in America who have decided that they want to enlist in the army of Israel, God bless them. And I've become very involved now in Garin Sabah, serving as the rabbi in America of lone soldiers.
I did not know that.
Doing as much work as I can.
That's wonderful.
Inspiring young men and women to go into the Israeli army to serve. Young people have a choice. People have a choice. They can live a life of being served or live a life of serving. I bless myself. I bless everyone. Blessed is the person who lives a life of serving others.
And when you talk about the big tent, you know one of the big issues in the Jewish world is J Street in that big tent. What's your feeling about J Street?
Look, I don't have good feelings about J Street. Politically, I'm in a very different, almost antithetical place. But I understand that J Street has people in J Street who are sincere, they're positively motivated, and for me, they are in the big tent. They're Am Yisrael. I take that very seriously. Marc, if somebody were to ask me if I can sum up my rabbinate, I would not hesitate for a moment and say, for me, my most basic teaching is Am Yisrael is my family, not just my nation. The best model of a nation is family. And on my tombstone one day, I hope at 120, if they write anything, they say, this man loved Jews. I love the whole world, but I have a special love for the Jewish people. They're my family. They're my mishpacha.
I love you so much, and the love you've given, we all want to give back to you. You're just fabulous,
Thank
and
you, Marc.
everything you do, and the insights you have, and there's wisdom, and it's grown as you've grown, and it's a gift you give to your congregation. It's a gift you give to your family. It's a gift you give to
And Marc,
the people of Israel, and it's a gift you've given me, and to be able to share you with our
Right.
audience. I mean, what a joy this is
Marc,
for me.
this is the parsha of the priestly benediction, and I'm a Kohen. And I want to say to you with all my heart and soul, separate from all the cameras, Yivarechecha Hashem Adonai Vishmerecha. God should bless you and keep you and should watch over you. And you should have health and long life and fulfillment forever and ever.
Thank you. Thank you. Avi Weiss, founding rabbi of the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, one of the most exciting synagogues in the world. If you ever have a chance to get to that part of the Bronx, Riverdale, just spend the Shabbat at the Hebrew Institute, HIR. And the founder of YCT, Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, and the Yeshivat Maharat, Yeshiva for Women. He has created Open Orthodoxy, and he is working tirelessly, and it will be to 120, and then we'll have to worry about what we put on his tombstone. And only nice things, I promise. And again, Avi is the Nachshon of our time. Avi's book, he's written many books, but his most recent book is Open the Iron Door, Memoirs of a Soviet Jewish Activist. It's a wonderful book. And I said to you before, you start this book, you cannot put it down. It's beautifully written, and it is a window into a piece of Jewish history that may be, first of all, it's definitely a piece that every young person should know. And for those of us who are not so young, it's a reminder of one of the most important moments of Jewish life, of Jewish history. So it's a great gift, and it's a gift to yourself or to somebody you love. It should be a part of every Jewish library. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments to any of the things that you heard Avi talk about. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Marc Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.